information about and educating about the process how new words are coined in various languages for new inventions, for instance. It's not just a scientific curiosity, it's something like in reality it's some form of an additional knowledge that can only that can also explain the process of how humans think and how the civilization works. Some of that sense we can catch because of thanks to the studying of how the implementation of new words to various languages takes place. And for instance, how do you put medieval words that used to exist already in medieval times, for instance, to name the new inventions like cars and trains and tanks and aeroplanes? It also reveals to us how the thinking process was going on and how the civilization and the local culture is working. So, for instance, aeroplane maybe is not the best example because this aero at the beginning it's Latin, so it's pretty universal, so it does not tell us much. But still, well, the second part of the word aeroplane, the plane, it comes from the French verb se planer. It means well, floating on the surface, something like this. So floating on the surface. For instance, when you are saying when you are talking about the contamination of air, for instance, then you can say that these clouds of contamination se planent sur l'air, or dans l'air, and so on. So it's this cloud se plane. Yeah. So this is the word for aeroplane is basically a combination of two universal languages, the Latin and French. But far more interesting are the examples of car and train. Of course, cars and trains exist on this planet only from 19th century on. In the case of trains, there were some inventions already made in 18th century by, for instance, Pierre Cugnot. Or was it Nicolas Cugnot or Pierre Cugnot? I'm not sure. I think it was Pierre Cugnot who has made the first locomotive, so to speak, but it was a limited invention and it was planned to be a device that would enable them to transport guns and cannons basically. So okay, so trains and cars are on this planet from 19th century on as a system. I mean, because even train was invented rarely in 18th century. It was a system only from 19th century on. So there were no words to use for trains and cars, and that they had to be very plain words because for every nation to not too much Latin and not too much scientific terms, and that's why it had to be some common word. So all nations used several terms that used to mean something else and was already existing in medieval times, for instance. So the English took the beginning of the word, either word carriage or the word chariot, and put it on that means something drawn by horses to use for military purposes or things like that, or transportation purposes, and they simply put it into a car. So we have cars because of that. Although the word carriage could be very well also spoken as carriage, and then philosophy, according to the philosophy, it would be a care, but it didn't happen. So they used this old pronunciation carriage, and then carriage, not courage because it's something else, carriage, and they use it and put it in. And the same philosophy was among the Spaniards. They used this elements of military vehicles, and el coche came into existence. El coche is the car in Spanish, but in French that would be somehow the word char did not detach itself from the ancient meaning of this word, and the word char detached itself from this meaning only to be used in relation to tanks. So tanks, in English there is a semantic, the semantic shift, because tanks, there was a encrypted word tanks used before the tanks were for the first time deployed. It was to conceal them as tanks, as the containers for oil or things like that, or petrol, really. So they are tanks. In Russian, it's also tanki, and but in German, for instance, those are panzers, because the panzer, because they stress this element of those vehicles to be protected by additional layers of steel and so on. So the French did not detach the char, the equivalent of car or chariot or chariot or something like this, to in relation to car, and they could use something else. So they could use, for instance, véhicule, but they didn't. So the most general term for something that is moving as a machine, this was used by the Russians, poyezd, in relation to train, for instance. But in relation to car, it was used by the French, the word voiture. It means something that is also going. Also it could be used the automobile, for instance, and the Germans use das Auto, and the Swedes use this bilen, the second part, for instance, and the French use the voiture. And whereas the Italians and the Russians, they use machine, simply machina, macchina, which is also funny. And in relation to trains, train, it used to mean train or train. It was basically a French word. It used to mean something, some column of people or animals or anything that it's going somewhere. And for instance, in the old, not so old, 19th century carol in French language, it's still used in the medieval meaning. So, de bon matin, je rencontre les trains, les trois grands rois se mettent au chemin. It means that I have met the train of, the three kings who wanted to visit Jesus with the gifts and so on, and they formed a train. That means that they were going one after another on the camels or something, so whatever. And that was the train, the first. And in this meaning, the word train always existed, and as far as French language existed. Train. It meant that some people are going one after another in the column, for instance. So, and this was adopted by the English. They never used any of the original English words. The same with the Dutch. The Dutch did not use their equivalent of the word train. Of the word train, they used exactly the French train, but they of course pronounce it train. The train is vertrokken. The train is vertrokken. It means that the train is went away. Okay, so train is vertrokken. But the equivalent would be exactly the word that is coming from the last part of the sentence I just said. So vertrokken, it means that there was some trek involved. Trek. means exactly this: going in a column of people or vehicles one after another in a train, in a trek. And the trek was also used, for instance, in the Dutch colonies of South Africa, which were dominated by the English in the 19th century, and some of the Dutch settlers who were speaking Afrikaans. That is a sort of Netherlands, but used in this region. So use the sort of Dutch language. And they call some of them that did not want to stay in the country dominated by the English, so they went north and organized new settlements. And this movement was called the Groot Trek, the big trek. And the word trek, after many decades, also meant some career in made some career in English, because we all know the film, the movie Star Trek. Of course, if you wanted to make this all wholly in Dutch, that should be Ster Trek, because ster is the word for star, but still we have this English star and then we have this Dutch trek. But somehow the Dutch didn't use the word trek for train. They adapted the French train, and now they say that the train is vertrokken. And by the way, the German equivalent of the word trek is Zug, and it's also medieval, ancient, or medieval. As long as the German language exists, then it's this word also exists. Zug, and we have Kreuzzüge, we have Feldzug, Kreuzzug. So the crusade, or the military Zug, military train. So and this was simply used for this is exactly the equivalent of Polish ciąg, and that's why we have pociąg. It means train in Polish, whereas the Russians preferred the word for vehicle. Their equivalent of the word vehicle is pojezd, and this is how they describe. This is how they call trains. So that's that. I hope it was interesting, because it is interesting how the new inventions are called in every single language. We are now living in the English language dominated world, but it was not always so. So we can also see how it was done to implement new words into the world in the 19th century, which was culturally more evenly organized, more evenly distributed. And also shows us how the human thinking is operating, and how the process of adapting new words is coming into existence in every particular nation and language. This is how the world also works. So languages are themselves an additional source of information. So it's not just a curiosity; it's our civilization itself, and how it works. And this was always my complaint about Polish programs about languages, because they were so concentrated on Polish language and never did the proper comparison between particular languages.